You're listening to Two Bobs, conversations on the art of creative entrepreneurship with David C. Baker and Blair Enns.
All right, David, in today's episode, we're discussing the fact that the great agency migration is upon us. And let me explain what I mean by that. So anecdotally, it seems to me that the large cities are emptying out. Agencies are all going virtual, and many agency owners and people who work in these firms who currently live in the city, those who can afford to live in the city are doing so. And so where I live, real estate is being snapped up, and I live in a little remote mountain village in the middle of British Columbia, Canada. And I keep hearing these stories, same stories in other more remote, more rural places of like property values, properties just being snapped up. I was talking to somebody the other day in rural Pennsylvania, and she lives on a 3-acre homestead, and she said everything that was on the market just bought almost instantly. The theory is from people from New York and Philadelphia who want to leave the city, who've been thinking about it for a while. Everybody's emptying out. So I've decided that I need to buy as much real estate in Caslow and rural British Columbia as I can, and also that I should develop a large creative co-working space for all of the creative firms who are about to leave New York, London, Toronto, etc., and all come to Caslow. I guess this is another session where I'm getting free advice from you, and what I want to know is like, how astute of an investor am I?
Yeah. Oh, we do not have the time.
Do the facts support the stories and my investment thesis? Will there be a great migration of the creative class out of cities? And am I going to get rich off of this? Discuss.
Oh, that's like the perfect volleyball set. And then you sit down in a lawn chair and let me just spike it. No, I think you're wrong. You might get rich, but probably not from this. I actually kind of bought into that. Well, first of all, whenever you start a sentence with "I've decided," it's like the hair on my arm go up. But yeah. I kind of bought the argument that you're not because you made it to me, but because I've been sensing the same things. Part of the real estate market is fueled by interest rates in the 2s, right? But locally, I know that's true where you have to buy a home within a half a day, and there's 3 people bidding at the opening price or higher, the list price or higher. So it does feel like that's kind of true, but is that really trickling down? I don't know. It's like, what's real anymore? Are you even real?
Now you're starting to sound like me.
Yeah. So no, I don't think that's going to happen. You and I are on different sides of this. If I understand you correctly, even on the work from home thing, I think there's going to be a significant sea change in work from home, but I don't think it'll be as severe as I hear a lot of people talking.
Let's start there. Let's talk about the trends, because we started having this conversation over a week ago. Like a good podcaster, you went and did some research, and I went and had a nap.
Yeah.
So let's just talk about what the actual trends are, what the stats are in the work from home movement, and then we could talk about where you think it's going, and then we'll look at how that ties into whether or not people are leaving cities.
Most of this comes from a study that the Civic Science people did. I really like that website, and they included a significant number of people from the PR, marketing, and the creative space. So it's not just broad across the workplace. It actually applies to the audience that you and I address. And some of these things are not all that surprising. The biggest advantages they're finding are things like skipping the commute. That's at the top of the list. The better work-life balance. They're more productive. And then a couple of surprising things, like they're spending less money because, they're not buying clothes to go to work. Obviously, I've seen them on Zoom. They're not going out to eat at lunch. They're not going to a bar or entertainment with workmates after work, and better mental health. So I think most people really do believe this is a good thing. But, well, for one thing, that's not really the owners that they're talking about. That's the employees, and their perspectives might be a little bit different than the principals. But on more stats, they would say that working from home is absolutely viable. It just needs serious adaptation.
When you say they, you're talking about surveying employees or?
The employees, right, yeah. And only 5% of them say that it's not viable. And I would guess that those are the folks who probably live in a place where They don't have the space to spread out. They have a lot of distractions. Maybe they don't have great internet. Maybe they're extroverts.
Bunch of kids at home.
Yeah, or kids at home, right? Yeah. Here's something else that was interesting. Now, this was in Raconteur, which is really interesting publication that comes out. I think it's every month. I love their articles. This was fascinating looking at this. This wasn't just the creative field, but white-collar workers at home. 45% are working more hours, 25% are working the same number, and then 25% are working the same but spread differently. Only 4% are working fewer hours. And that really matches with what I have seen. And I think it's contributing a little bit to the fatigue. It's not just Zoom fatigue. It's the fact that they actually are working more hours. This is fueled, and there's evidence for this, in part because people in the early days of this, say in late March, April, and May, it was fueled a little bit by fear of getting laid off. So they needed to demonstrate that they were essential to the organization. That's where some of this extra hard work is coming from. And then in some cases, it's not really extra hard work. It just feels like extra hard work because we've lost those normal boundaries. We're not traveling from one place to the next. We're not running into new people. We're not getting dressed to go to work. So it just feels like it never ends, right? It's like this endless vacation without a lot of fun things planned. I kind of tweeted about that a few weeks ago.
And I remember, I'm trying to think back because I'm not very good with dates, but I think it was circa 1990 when I worked from home for 6 months. So I was running a field office for a large multinational agency. A large account required this office kind of in the middle of nowhere in Canada. And so when I say I was running the field office, in the early days, it was just me, and then it was me and one other person. I don't remember the circumstances, but I had to move my office. So I thought, well, I'm just going to work from home. And so for 6 months, I worked from a home office, and it was a horrible experience because I felt like an unwanted guest had moved into my house. And that guest, it wasn't me, it was the job. And the problem with the unwanted guest was the lines between when I was working and not working started to blur. And I found myself working more often, like almost always working, and being less productive because I was more distracted by my actual life, the things that were going on around me at home. So that was 30 years ago. I decided, okay, I need to move back into an office. So I went and found an office. And I suspect there's a lot of that going on right now too. It's like, well, the lines, they're just not as clear anymore, are they?
Right. Your experience is a little bit like mine in that I've been to your home a couple times and I've seen your office. You walk down the hill and you're in a separate building. I walk across the field to a separate building. How much of the time are you working in that separate place versus working in your home during the day?
Oh, these days I'm almost not working at home at all. There are times when I might do half of my work sitting at the kitchen table, but there's so many people in my house these days. I can't get any work done at home. I actually have to come to work to get work done.
Yeah.
So right now, because the office is outside of the home, all of my work gets done at the office. And when I'm at home, I'm not in work mode at all.
Right. Yeah. And that's probably a lot healthier. But most of the people that we're talking about here, they don't have that option. They're working from another spot in the home, whether it's a spare bedroom or the basement, or like I've been working with a client recently where he's in a closet and there's a blanket hanging up over him. He looks like he's in a child's tent, one of those tents that you set up in the living room. So it's all over the place, right? So the other thing that surprised me about this is that people are more interested in going back to the office as a group than I expected they would be. I kind of thought that a lot of folks were accepting this for a long time. The truth is, we really don't know what the long-term implications of this are. We do know some things for sure, it seems to me. Like one of those is that, working from home, working remotely is a lot more doable than we thought. And another thing I would say is that this fear we had about people not working hard, that was pretty unfounded. We can trust our folks and so on. What we don't know, though, is what will happen to the collaboration/innovation long term, because that's something you've got to look at on a long-term horizon. The other thing we don't know is how it will work to integrate new people that we hire into this environment, because it's an unfair test at the moment for firms that have gone virtual who weren't virtual before, because they had this under carriage of a fabric of culture. They trusted each other and they knew how to read each other. They had collaborated in many cases. So to move away from that gave them this advantage that a new employee who's coming in won't have. And we don't really know yet what that will look like. Although, a lot of firms, a lot of your clients, a lot of my clients have been remote forever. So it obviously can be done well. But will these firms that have made this change, will they be able to make that transition? They'll be able to make it, but how painful will it be?
Yeah. And I always wonder about that too, because even before the pandemic hit, you and I know firms that have been virtual for a while. And I've always wondered how they dealt with that. But let's get back to my real estate investing.
Okay. I'm not going to be an investor. Let's just clarify that. Okay.
Oh, well, we might as well just end this podcast now.
Yeah.
But more seriously, I am interested as somebody who lives in a small town. And I've lived here 20 years. And for the 20 years that I've been here, the local residents have been saying a variation of brace yourself because it's about to happen. And it is this little beautiful remote mountain village is about to be discovered and the entire world is going to move here. Mm-hmm. And so I've been part of this conversation for 20 years. Brace yourself. It's going to happen. I guess early on, I was probably one of those people saying, brace yourself, it's going to happen. And then the people who grew up here, had been here longer than me, would just roll their eyes and go, now I'm the person rolling his eyes. But I woke up one day not too long ago and I thought, it's actually happening. It feels like it's actually happening. Now, at what scale is it going to happen? And let's just broaden the conversation out to just this idea of moving out of the cities. At what scale is it going to happen? How long is it going to happen? How long before people get sick of this? I was talking to a friend of mine before we recorded this morning. She's in Ireland, lives in Dublin, moved her young family out to the country 6 months ago and kind of got stuck there in quarantine and was happy to be stuck there near a beach, raising 2 little kids, etc. But they go back to Dublin tomorrow, and man, is she looking forward to getting back to the city. But Dublin is like New York too. It's when I talk to the people who are in the cities right now, basically the cities have been emptied out. A friend of mine said, I'm great in my apartment, but as soon as I go outside, it's really depressing. The service sector part of the economy is all shut down. The restaurants and bars aren't open. He said there's homeless people on every street. So it feels like we're back to the mid 80s when it comes to the big cities. Crime is up, et cetera. Now, again, this is all anecdotal, but I believe that's the current state of a lot of the big cities. I guess my question is, there's so much change going on. Do you see a fundamental shift from urban living to more rural living because of this? Because if all of a sudden you realize that you can do your job from anywhere, it makes sense that you would move to wherever you wanted to and could afford to. Right. You would live where you wanted to live and just bring your job with you.
Yeah.
Why is that not going to happen?
I think because it's a little bit of an overreaction. We've read things on both ends of the spectrum about the death of cities and know the city's going to be hurt badly for a while, but it'll come roaring back and be even better than before. So my assumption was that people were wanting to move away from cities because it was so expensive to live there, because disease spreads more quickly when you have humans concentrated together. But the data, again, Civic Science and Wall Street Journal are showing that there are a lot of people who are interested in moving, but there's only a 1% difference in their wanting to move from the city or wanting to move from, say, suburban or from rural. So the move is not being driven by the fact that they're in a city. The move is being driven by the fact that if they're going to be working from home, they want more space. And so they think they might be able to get more space. But here's the question that was asked. Now, this is a little bit different. Would you be willing to take a pay cut if you moved to a less expensive locale? 1/3 would be somewhat willing, and the rest of them is like, absolutely not. That's not a part of it. And then if you look at how interested are people moving based on where they're living now, city dwellers are only 1% more likely to move than suburban or rural movers. So I just don't think change happens that quickly. I see this rapidly increasing sense, particularly from principals and long-term employees, that they are anxious to get back in the office. So I'm talking out of both sides of my mouth. So I just said that. Now listen to this. Just over 50% of people would be willing to take a vaccine if one is developed. So that's going to impact this too.
Just over 50%.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Wow. Wonder what's driving that.
Yeah.
So much for herd immunity via vaccine.
Yeah, we think of anti-vaxxers as, a small percentage. It's not really. So here's the actual, this is Civic Science last month. Would I be willing to take a vaccine? And this is related to, in order so I can go back to work. 53% said yes. 2 quarters earlier, it was 69%. So it's dropped drastically to about half of the population would be willing to take a vaccine related to going back to work. I don't know what's driving that. Maybe it's the fact that we're discovering that I'm not an epidemiologist, as you'll soon find out, but there's different strains of this, so maybe it's not all that effective, a little bit like a flu shot. Maybe it's only going to last for 3 months. I don't know what's in people's minds.
My answer is I'm absolutely willing to take a vaccine. I'm just not going to be in the first 200 million.
It's like you don't have to outrun the bear. You just don't have to be the slowest guy.
Yeah, just don't like that Russian vaccine that Putin is fast tracking. Not interested in that one. So it's like, it really depends on the vaccine.
You're listening to Two Bobs, conversations on the art of creative entrepreneurship. Your hosts are David C. Baker, author, speaker, and advisor to owners of expert firms, and Blair Enns of Win Without Pitching, the sales training and coaching program for creative entrepreneurs. For more information, go to twobobs.com. If you find this podcast helpful, please help us by telling a friend and rating us on iTunes. Thank you. Now back to David and Blair.
Can we talk a little bit about how recruiting might change? Because I think about how recruiting has been done before this, where you try to have a local presence. You might guest teach a class at a local college or university and cherry pick the top students. You might have interns come over and so on. Man, I think all of that is going to change. Just like when the world was Googleized, we could have now clients from anywhere across the country or the world. And we did not have any local protective geographic barriers. So if people are working from home more, then our recruitment is going to be international or at least national. And that means that what I've been calling for, and I think you have too, really needs to be realized. And that's that you need to be viewing attracting great people to your team as almost as important as attracting new clients. You need an actual business plan to attract recruits, and you're not going to be able to rely on the normal local connections if you're willing to let people work from home.
Yeah, I hadn't even thought of that. That's a profound insight, I think. If you imagine an efficient recruiting market, and I don't think we're anywhere near close to an efficient recruiting market, but by that I mean it's basically you have this ability to identify, reach out to those people who are good fits for the job that you have, and vice versa. In a really efficient market like that, all of the best talent would just accrue to all of the best firms, right? Like one of your advantages, if you're in, just pick a secondary market, let's say you're in Boise, Idaho, is like you're not competing with a firm in San Francisco, right? For that person who's in Boise.
Right.
Maybe this won't make sense only in my mind. But
no, it makes perfect sense. I mean, look at all the firms that have struggled to attract enough employees. And so they would, as an example, and I hear this all the time, or I heard it all the time, let's open an office in Austin. That way we can attract some of the great digital talent there. Well, that's not going to be necessary anymore. And I'm hoping this trickles down so that we don't have this silly notion of, we're a worldwide firm. We've got 6 offices. We really have 1, but 5 of them are employees working from this city. That's a little bit just kind of unnecessary in a new world. It's an exciting time to be alive. I think most of this is really good for the industry. We've had this change forced on us so quickly, and we're still working to catch up. But we're a very adaptable industry, and it's probably some of the other industries that are going to struggle a little bit more. I just find it interesting to watch and see what happens and see how people react to it.
Do you have any sources for suggestions on how people can get better at the whole work from home thing?
I'm in massive listen mode, just trying to learn from as many people as possible. I did 2 keynote speeches yesterday, and one of them was on that. So it was pretty interesting to learn. I found a useful collection of stuff over at Toggle, TOGGL, How to Work from Home. They basically just scrape together some of their best practices as a firm. They've been working from home or distributed/remote for many, many years. There's also some nice apps coming up that I think could help. What I hear people miss the most is just the casual connections that you have. And it
Yeah.
doesn't feel casual when you have to schedule it in Zoom and then sit and stare at a screen. So there are about a half a dozen of them. The one that seems most promising is called Water Cooler. It's in beta right now, but it allows for those casual conversations. I see more people, oddly enough, they're going back to some physical connection in the absence of working face to face. So they're mailing packages to employees and then calling them to follow up with it and so on. There are so many great things that are happening, honestly, like this meeting culture. Gosh, before all this happened, meetings were the bane of somebody's existence. And now, thankfully, that average meeting that just had to be 60 minutes, it's can be 30 minutes now. And do we really have to have it? And those are the really good things that are happening because of this.
There's got to be a backlash, right? I was talking to somebody this morning, and we're just saying, okay, I think we're in this new normal. A surprisingly large percentage of the economy that would include most of the listeners to this podcast are in pretty good shape, but some of the PPP money or the government support, financial support is going to run out soon. And then if we think ahead into, like, if I just think of spring 2021, I don't know why I'm picking that date. It just feels to me like that's going to be the time when maybe I can't stand it and I need to be with people more. Like I'm not suffering because of where I live and we're relatively sheltered from COVID right now, touch wood. But I can imagine there's going to be a backlash. There's going to be this collective frustration of the fact that we can't be together physically anymore.
Right. Yeah. You can already feel that people are loosening some of the restrictions in their mind and willing to accept some of what that means. It's going to happen more and more. What's hard to sort out is that this isn't just COVID. It's also political and social unrest. And of course, the economic uncertainty that comes from all of this. So this is one of those times where you're going to tell your kids, you wouldn't believe what it was like in 2020. And then you'll pull out pictures of you in a mask and so on. And you'll pull out clippings of really serious unrest where people were hurt. And it just built this uncertainty. So that's the big thing I would want to say. What wears folks out right now more than anything is the uncertainty about everything. That's what wears them out.
Yeah. So let's put a bow around this. Do you have some advice for people?
Yeah. Don't make big decisions around all of this. Just keep learning with an open mind and make slow decisions and make them on a temporary basis. So let's test this for a while and see how it works.
Well, other than, if you big decision is to move to Caslow and rent some co-working space from Win Without Pitching.
This is really
that would be a valid one. This whole interview isn't going the way I thought it would, but you keep wanting to talk about facts. I want to sell real estate.
Well, I kind of thought you were on the right track about people moving there, and then you told me what some of the real estate costs. It's a lot more expensive than I expected it would be.
Yeah, it's Canadian dollars, though. It's like monopoly money.
Yeah, right.
All right, back to your advice. So don't make any big decisions. It's like you're hungry, angry, lonely, or tired. Don't make any big decisions about your life in that moment.
Right. Yeah. Don't decide if you love your kid when they're hangry at this moment.
Right. Yeah. What else?
Note that your employees might not be like you. I keep seeing principals talking with this built-in assumption that employees don't need as much structure and they're open to change. And all of that is true, but they're not like you. You left a job and started a company and put everything on the line and are constantly taking risks. That's not the environment that a lot of employees, your team members want. So just take that into account. I'd say be more flexible about things too. Like here's one example. This is the perfect time to think less about how long people work and what they accomplish. In Blair, your business, you're talking a lot about value pricing. It's not about inputs, it's about outputs. But why do we then insist on inputs for our team rather than outputs? And this is a great opportunity to begin rethinking that. I don't have all the answers to that one, but I just think it's worth thinking about. And just watch for those long-term unintended consequences, specifically how we incorporate new employees where we don't have that underlying cultural fabric, and also are we missing any collaboration or innovation over time? And then, well, let's keep ripping the Band-Aid off, right? Let's not let a great crisis go to waste. Let's really rip the Band-Aid off and make any changes that are necessary, recognizing that you still have to be involved in change management and keeping other people up to speed and socializing decisions and so on. I wish I had more definitive stuff. I'm just listening very carefully to what I'm hearing out there as well.
As you make that last point, I'm thinking of some conversations I've had with agency principals. Yeah, it's fine. We're adapting. And even in our business, and I'm sure in your business, I'm a little surprised at our ability to adapt and how bad things are not. But just because you've turned the corner financially, you've figured out the new business model, et cetera, you've got everybody working from home, doesn't mean that everything's okay for those people in their situation at home.
Right. And you may need all the money that you're supposedly saving on your expensive facility on 5th or Broadway. You're probably going to have to spend all of that and more to make this more workable long term. So it's not really about money as much as it is allocation of that money.
I once heard, I forget who it is. It's the guys who do the fractional CPA stuff for the agency world.
Mm-hmm. Summit CPA.
Yeah, I once heard him speak at a Bureau of Digital conference, and he was talking about these financial ratios in your firm. And I forget, you would know what the ratios would be for like what percentage of your income you should be spending on your overhead. And he said, in a distributed firm, that cost goes way down, but essentially you should reallocate the bulk of that cost to other ways of keeping your people connected. So it would be, back in the pre-COVID days, it would be kind of gatherings of some kind,
right?
Parties even. So I think that's one way to think about it. You're saving on the overhead costs, the facilities costs, but it might be a mistake to put all of that into your pocket. You should think about reallocating some of those costs into some other tools or means of getting your people more connected.
Yeah, exactly. 6% is that number. So you can usually afford to spend 6% on facility costs. That includes the lease payment, any parking, any utilities, security, cleaning, and so on. Yeah, you could reallocate that for sure. And it probably needs to be done. I wouldn't want people making a decision about facility based on money because I'm not sure it's really going to save money.
Yeah, let me put a bow around the real estate thing. What I really think is going on with people buying up land and houses in these more rural markets, I think most of these purchases will end up being second and third homes. I think there will be escape clauses for if the shit hits the fan again in some capacity. People have a place to go. It's been my experience as somebody who's lived in a market like this for 20 years. I've watched from the advertising profession in particular, where you get these rock star creative people in the ad business, you watch them burn out and then they make the big public pronouncement to the industry that they're dropping out and moving to the middle of nowhere. They disappear and then they're back 6 months later. Turns out people didn't need to move. They just needed a vacation.
That's sort of like CPB from Florida to Colorado. That's kind of what happened there.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
All right. Well, this has been helpful, but I'm left with no further advice on what I should be doing on the real estate investment front.
I'm picturing you all hot and sweaty and digging holes to put your signs up and then wearing a sandwich board sign, hoping that anybody passing through will buy land from you. Good luck with that, Blair.
Welcome to Blairtopia, where the population is still one.
Thanks, Blair.
Thanks, David.
Thank you for listening to Two Bobs with David C. Baker and Blair Enns. Subscribe and learn more at twobobs.com. That's the number 2, BOBS.com.